The Zags turned a lot of heads by getting a number 5 seed in the 2024 NCAA Tournament. Even more shocking, a former WCC opponent is the reason why.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Tuesday. Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, make every moment more. Right now, new customers who join today, you will get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. We're going to discuss which of the two WCC 5-seeded teams are going to advance further in the NCAA Tournament, Gonzaga or St. Mary's. We're going to talk about that. A former Zag hitting the transfer portal yet again, as well as the women's team getting the highest seed in their whole history as a 4 seed in Spokane, taking on UC-Irvine. All of that today. We are going to start with some mailbag questions, though. This first question comes from Jackie via Discord, who says, I'll make this short and sweet. Zags seem overseeded in the NCAA tournament. Agree or disagree? Well, Jackie, it's a bit more complicated than that. For those of you who were kind of paying attention to the seeding and how all this all shook out, you may have already seen this story. Great recap written by Theo Lawson of the Spokesman Review, which kind of helps lays out exactly what happened here. The short answer is the Zags kind of were overseeded. And overseeded is maybe not the right word, but they were the selection committee, after they released the bracket, they released their overall seed lines, 1 through 68, just ranking all the teams on a list. And from there, that's how they actually make the bracket using those seeds. Gonzaga came in at number 21. Typically, that would not be a 5 seed. That would, in fact, be a 6 seed. BYU, former Gonzaga opponent in the WCC for over a decade, now, of course, in the Big 12. BYU is 17th, 4 spots ahead of Gonzaga, and yet BYU finds themselves as a 6 seed in the East region in Omaha, taking on the A10 champion Duquesne Dukes, while Gonzaga, of course, plays in Salt Lake City, very close to Provo, Utah, and, of course, taking on McNeese State. We'll get more into that later. Here's the reasoning. BYU, as a member of the Latter-day Saints, they do not play on Sunday. Most Gonzaga fans are aware of this. They know this from the WCC tournament, having their schedule switched the entire time that BYU was in the WCC. They no longer played those games on Sundays. I know the baseball team would have to play. I think they would either play Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or they would do double headers on Saturday to avoid scheduling conflicts where BYU wouldn't be able to play that final game of those 3-game series on Sundays. This is something that Gonzaga fans are familiar with. This is something BYU has dealt with for the entirety of their time as a academic and athletic institution. And yet it caused a problem when the selection committee went to actually put the bracket together. While they had felt that BYU had earned a 5 seed, and while Gonzaga in theory had only earned a 6 seed in this situation, they were trying to figure out a way to put BYU on a line where they would be able to avoid playing on Sundays. Gonzaga is currently playing on Thursday and Saturday. They'll have McNeese State on Thursday. The winner of Gonzaga-McNeese will play on Saturday. They'll play the winner of Kansas and Stanford. That is the problem. They couldn't put BYU on that 5 line there because they cannot put them in a matchup where they would play another team from their conference before the Sweet 16. That is a rule that does not allow them to do that. So they could not put BYU on the 5 line in Salt Lake. And instead, because of the way that the rest of the bracket shook out, they would have to play on Sunday. So the only way that they could find to avoid that situation for BYU was to put them on the 6 line. That pushed Gonzaga up to a 5 seed, where they, of course, are the same seed as St. Mary's, as well as Wisconsin and San Diego State, all earning those 5 seeds. That is why Gonzaga is a 5 seed. So to answer the question of are they overseeded, I guess, yes, it's kind of a complicated question. It's like I said, it's not exactly a hard and fast answer. BYU fans, and I think perhaps justifiably so, would indicate that yes, Gonzaga shouldn't have earned that 5 seed, but that's how the cookie crumbles to me. I don't really have, I don't think that that's a particularly big insult if BYU fans are saying, well, Gonzaga didn't actually earn that 5 seed. It's because of us. Like, well, sorry, that's just how it goes. I'm not trying to trash on them or anything. I get it. That's part of, who they are as an institution. And I think sticking to your values is important, but that this is what it costs you. I mean, this is the situation they're in now. Duquesne is probably the weakest 11 seed. Duquesne finished 6th in the A10. The A10 is a decent basketball conference. It is better than the WCC, but it is not dramatically better than the WCC. Duquesne finished 6th in the A10 regular season, but they went on a hot streak, won a handful of games in the A10 conference tournament, and of course found themselves in the big dance. Meanwhile, McNeese probably a better team than Duquesne. I think that's debatable, but McNeese won 30 games this year. Grand Canyon, who St. Mary's is taking on in that 5-12 matchup in Spokane. We'll get more into that game a little bit later. Grand Canyon, very, very good team. I think there's a strong argument that either Grand Canyon or McNeese would have maybe made a better 11 seed than Duquesne. It's not a conspiracy necessarily. It just might be the situation where they gave BYU a tiny bit of an easier 11-seeded team to face off with than they might have otherwise faced in a different situation. So that's kind of the situation here. It has been confirmed. This is not just a theory as to why this happened. The selection committee has confirmed that this is how it shook out. This is why they seeded it the way that they did. They were trying to honor BYU. Now, Mark Pope had quotes, and I don't know if his quotes came out. I don't know if he was aware of the reasoning for the selection committee when he said this, but he was not thrilled. He was fairly unhappy in his quotes about them getting a 6 seed. He felt they deserved higher. I agree with him. Certainly the committee obviously agrees with him if they slotted them in at 17, but that's not how it worked. And it makes me wonder what that means for Mark Pope. Because if he didn't know and he found out, he's like, oh, okay, that's fine, cool, then move on. But if he's still mad about it, like this is the institution you work at. And I have this just kind of nagging thing popping in my head that Mark Pope played at Washington. That's where he played college basketball. And, well, Washington's got a head coaching job that's pretty open. And Washington's moving to the Big Ten. And while the Big 12 is still a better basketball conference, Washington's a big resource institution. They don't have any rules about what day of the week you can play basketball games on. And taking that job and going to Seattle into a huge recruiting market and playing in the Big Ten, I'm just throwing it out there. I think there's a possibility that Mark Pope could eventually take that job at Washington as soon as this offseason if he chooses to. Having said all of this about Gonzaga's seed, 5 is not crazy. They're 17th in the net. They are ahead of Kentucky, Kansas, San Diego State, and Wisconsin. Kentucky are the 3 seed. Kansas are the 4 seed, ahead of Gonzaga. San Diego State are the 5 seed. Wisconsin also are the 5 seed. Net is not the be-all, end-all, but I don't think you can argue that Gonzaga is definitively overseeded if there are 2 teams behind them in the net that had better seeds and 2 teams that are on the 5 line that also had the same or that also were lower in the net. Gonzaga is also 15th in KenPom. KenPom has less relevancy in terms of the selection committee's eyes, but worth acknowledging they are higher than Wisconsin and Kentucky and St. Mary's and San Diego State and Kansas, who all earned either 5 or higher seeds in the NCAA tournament. Final question here before we get into the second segment, start comparing Gonzaga and St. Mary's and their seeds. This comes from Ricky Raspberry on Discord, who says, as a longtime GU fan, I'll never totally discount a team for the competition they've played, but McNeese's schedule is pretty ugly. A team that shoots well from 3 is worth taking seriously, but how much deference should we give their stats considering how bad 95% of the teams they played were? Their best win is against KenPom number 80 VCU. Yeah, this is the situation here. McNeese did not play a good schedule. And I don't want to hold that against them and punish them for that because, again, as Ricky noted in his question, this has been held against Gonzaga for decades, and I know how hard it is for mid-major programs to schedule good opponents. Will Wade just took over this program. The schedule had probably been made years in advance, difficult to schedule a tough non-conference. But McNeese, they're 1-0 in quad 1 games. 1-0, that's it. It was that 11-point win over VCU, as Ricky noted. VCU is a good team, but they didn't make the tournament. They were a 5 seed in the A10, and we kind of talked about Duquesne being a 6 seed and them not being that great of a team. Now, McNeese is 2-2 in quad 2 games. They have a 21-point win over UAB. That's the only team they played that made the NCAA tournament this year, is UAB, the Blazers, who are in a 12 seed. Now, they beat them by 21 points, but this is a 12-seeded team that only made the tournament because they won the AAC, the American Athletic Conference. If they had not won that conference tournament, there is no chance that UAB would have been dancing. They also beat Michigan. This is the worst Michigan team in 60 years. So yes, McNeese didn't have as many opportunities on their schedule to play good teams. That does not mean that they would have failed against those good teams. but it also just means we don't know. They haven't been tested in that way. This is also a team that has a quad 4 loss to Southeast Louisiana. We're going to get way more into McNeese on future episodes on Wednesday and on Thursday. We're going to break them down, the pros, the cons, what they're good at, what they're bad at, Coach Will Wade, their history, etc., all of it. But I wanted to answer this question here because while I am with you, Ricky, I don't like bashing teams for their lack of strength of schedule, especially mid-major teams where the Power 6 teams are refusing to play them. But it is absolutely a relevant factor when looking at McNeese's stats, their performances, their record. All of it is relevant through the lens of the fact that they only played one team that is dancing in the NCAA tournament. Well, both Gonzaga and St. Mary's, they earned those 5 seeds in the big dance. Who's going to advance further this year between these two WCC powerhouses? We got that and an update on our friend Dominick Harris. Coming up after a word from today's sponsor, Nissan. This week's March Madness Bracket Highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stood out, a team that pushed it further than the rest. Just like all of our new 2024 Nissan SUVs, these guys were able to take it to the next level. This week, we're talking Tennessee. They can only be described as a Nissan Pathfinder. They've been thrilling to watch and have really created a lane for themselves after claiming the top spot in the very competitive SEC. Player of the Year candidate Dalton Knecht has carried the Vols all season long, and they are a team to watch in March. So take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is also brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. Folks, Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides you access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's March Madness, opening weekend of Major League Baseball, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. We have Amazon Fire TV sticks on every single TV in our house because we love the layout. The user experience is incredibly friendly, and the remote is super handy. It has little buttons that take you to Prime Video, Netflix, Disney Plus, and Hulu. That's pretty much where we're going if we're not on Fubo watching basketball. Fire TV also recently created the Fire TV channels, which deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. And that includes Locked On. You can watch any Locked On video on an Amazon Fire TV. You can also watch the latest in professional sports and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels let you dive into all the game analysis, highlights, and more, and keeps you up to date on the latest in the world of sports, March Madness, NBA, MLB, and more. So check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. To learn more, visit Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags. We're still talking seeding in the NCAA Tournament as we are about 36 hours away from Gonzaga tipping off 4:25 p.m. Pacific time on Thursday against McNeese State in Salt Lake City. We're going to have a lot more about that game and the rest of the region coming up on a Wednesday and Thursday's episode here of Locked On Zags. But what I want to do now, Gonzaga St. Mary's, they got the same seed in the NCAA tournament. And I'm not sure if that has ever happened before. I apologize, I didn't have that in my notes, but it's an easy way to compare these two teams. St. Mary's ran away with the WCC regular season. They was never really in question, especially after they beat Gonzaga in February. But here they are, with Gonzaga picking up a win at the final regular season game in Moraga, St. Mary's getting the tiebreaker with that win in WCC in Vegas. But now they both got 5 seeds. They both got ostensibly similar paths that they have to take in order to get to the Sweet 16, into the Elite 8, and beyond. How will they do? Who will do better? Those are the questions here. As a reminder for Gonzaga, they are 5 seed in the Midwest region, playing in Utah, in Salt Lake specifically. They got McNeese State, the Cowboys, as their 12 seed. If they advance past that game, they will play the winner of a 4 seed versus 13 matchup. That is Kansas, the Jayhawks, Rock Chalk, taking on the Stanford Bulldogs. And look, this is not a guaranteed win for Kansas. We will get more into that on Wednesday's show as we kind of look deeper into this whole region. But Stanford is very good. They play a very aggressive physical press style, and Kansas has no depth. No depth. Hunter Dickinson and Kevin McCullough missed the Big 12 tournament. They got waxed by Cincinnati without their 2 starters because this team only really has 4, 5-ish good players. McCullough starts at the 5, KJ Adams at the 4, Dickinson at the 5, Adams at the 4, McCullough at the 3, Johnny Furphy at the 2, DeJuan Harris at the 1. Furphy hasn't been very good until the last 6 weeks or so of the season. No bench depth whatsoever. Elmarco Jackson, their star freshman, got benched because he just wasn't contributing. Nick Timberlake, transfer they added from Towson. He's been pretty terrible, quite frankly, for this team. The only other player vaguely in the rotation is Parker Brown, who transferred from Santa Clara, the older brother of Christian Braun, who is in the NBA with the Denver Nuggets, a Kansas alum. So I'm not that concerned about Kansas. And I think if they're short any of those guys, if Dickinson or McCullough are not playing, there's a real chance that Samford could end up picking up a victory here. So if Gonzaga advances, they play either Kansas or Samford. After that, the rest of the region, Purdue is your 1 seed. They'll have to advance past the 16th seed, which they may not be able to do that because they didn't do it last year. I don't think it's going to happen to them twice in a row. And then they got the winner of the 8 seed Utah State versus 9 seed TCU. I could see that tripping Purdue up. I really could. But if it does not, then you get a rematch in the Sweet 16 between Purdue and Gonzaga. Again, assuming Gonzaga is in the Sweet 16 here. Gonzaga led first half against Purdue. They led for an entire half. That was a version of Gonzaga that is not as good as the version of Gonzaga we have seen lately. Purdue has improved throughout the season as well. That does not necessarily mean Gonzaga is just going to roll to a victory, but there is reason to assume that Gonzaga is capable of beating Purdue. They did it for 20 minutes. They could absolutely do it again here. Then, of course, you have the 2 seed Creighton, the 3 seed Tennessee. At that point, you're all the way into the Elite 8. Let's take a look at St. Mary's, their situation here. They're a 5 seed in the West region. They're taking on a 12-seeded Lopes team out of Grand Canyon, coached by Bryce Drew, a team that has aspirations to someday be in the WCC. They played Gonzaga last year in the NCAA Tournament. Now they get an opportunity to play St. Mary's, the other powerhouse in the WCC, in the NCAA Tournament as well. And they're playing them in Spokane. Added wrinkle for St. Mary's right there. If they do advance, they play the winner of a 4-seeded Alabama versus a 13-seeded Charleston. Alabama is one of the best offensive teams in the entire country, and they are outside the top 100 in adjusted defensive efficiency. Charleston's a top 50 offensive team in the country. They are outside the top 175 in adjusted defensive efficiency. I tell you this to say, if you are a Gonzaga fan who doesn't like watching college basketball outside of Gonzaga, if you struggle to watch St. Mary's, if you struggle to watch Tony Bennett in Virginia, if the other basketball you watch that's not Gonzaga is the NBA, you should watch Alabama Charleston, because that's going to be a first to 95 situation. Those two teams are offensive juggernauts, and they do not play defense on the other end of the floor. Going to be an interesting matchup. Whoever wins takes on St. Mary's if they get by Grand Canyon. Interesting wrinkle. Good offenses versus St. Mary's is good defense. However, St. Mary's also has a very efficient offense, and they'll be able to exploit matchups against either Alabama or Charleston. At that point, if the Gaels do advance to the Sweet 16, the team likely awaiting them is going to be Hubert Davis's North Carolina Tar Heels. They do have to get by Mississippi State or Michigan State, the 8-9. I'm betting on Tom Izzo in March. Who isn't? No disrespect to Chris Jans and Mississippi State. They're a good team, but I think we're going to get Carolina and Michigan State in the second round there. I think we get Carolina advancing. St. Mary's, that's a real tough matchup. Carolina's really good. They space the floor extremely well, especially when Cormac Ryan's shooting well. RJ Davis is one of the top 3 players in the country alongside Connect and Edey at Purdue. I really like this North Carolina team a lot. I think they would probably beat a St. Mary's team here. If it does come down to a 1-5 matchup and it's Gonzaga versus Purdue and St. Mary's in North Carolina, I like Gonzaga's odds of advancing past Purdue a little bit better than I like St. Mary's is there. But the main thing for St. Mary's, they got to get by Grand Canyon, and they got to do it in a city that they don't really like having them there. And media availability, again, this comes from Theo Lawson on Twitter. It was a great tweet. Showed some quotes from players and coaches about the fact that St. Mary's is playing in Spokane. And I loved this. I loved the spread of how these quotes were shaken out. Here's Nolan Hickman's quote. He says, "Hopefully have some Spokane fans down their neck." Anton Watson says, "All GU fans should go to that game wearing purple." That is, of course, the color for the Grand Canyon Lopes. Graham Ike said it's probably going to be an away game for them. And then Mark Few said, quote, "I hope our people root for them." I just love the difference in those quotes. It's exactly what you would expect. The players, there's some bad blood there. There's respect, sure, whatever, but they want to see St. Mary's lose, and they're not even afraid to say it to the media. Mark Few doesn't actually want to see St. Mary's lose, partly because Randy Bennett and his friend, partly because he knows that every game that St. Mary's wins is not only good for Gonzaga's reputation, their brand, the conference, it literally puts money in their pocket. So the more St. Mary's does, the better it is for Gonzaga. Mark Few knows that. He wants to see St. Mary's do well. The players don't care. They want to see that place filled to the brim with Gonzaga fans screaming down St. Mary's neck. And I think it's going to be a factor in this game. How much, I don't know. I mean, Randy Bennett and the Gaels came into Spokane and beat Gonzaga this year. Certainly they can beat Grand Canyon if they can beat Gonzaga. But it's going to be a different situation just in general, but it's a factor. It's a factor for sure. And I'm very curious to see how it plays out. St. Mary's also down Joshua Jefferson. He has not played for the last couple of weeks. He was a non-factor. He was not in the game for Gonzaga against when Gonzaga played St. Mary's in Moraga. Jefferson was out for that game. He won't be playing for the rest of the season. So that certainly is something to keep an eye on. If I had to pick, I think Gonzaga advances farther, partly because I actually have Grand Canyon pulling off the upset in my bracket. I think they could do it against St. Mary's. But I do think both these teams are reasonably going to be, I think it's reasonable to think they both advance even into the Sweet 16 and struggle against those 1 seeds. We'll see how it shakes out, but fun to see these two teams end up on the same seed line. That's just kind of a fun storyline for a WCC that many considered very, very weak this year. For them to all of a sudden have two teams ending up in the top 5 seeds is a pretty impressive accomplishment for those two programs. Sticking with the WCC real quick, Dominick Harris has entered the NCAA transfer portal. He's also testing the NBA draft waters. Dom, of course, spent 2 years at Gonzaga as for his first 2 years of his college career at Gonzaga, played in just 38 games, about 6 minutes a night, almost exclusively in garbage time, about 2.5 points, 3 boards per game. Transferred this last offseason. Injuries were a big factor for him in his time at Gonzaga. He transfers to LMU, stays within the WCC. That's rare, but not unheard of to happen. And then he had a good year. 14 points, 3.5 boards, 1 assist per game. Played 24 games, 13 starts, 28.5 minutes per game. Big key for him, shot 44.8% from three. One of the most prolific, high-volume three-point shooters in the entire country. 6 3-point attempts per game knocked him down at about a 45% clip. That is going to get him attention. He doesn't do much else. 1 assist per game. He's not a point guard. For anybody looking at him as a point guard, if you're a fan of another team, you happen to come onto the show, he is not a point guard. He is a catch-and-shoot three-point specialist, and he's really good at that. There's not a lot else to his game. That's not a criticism necessarily. It's just a fact about who he is, what he brings to the team right now. Dom had injuries this year. Again, only played 24 games. Injuries have continued to be a part of the storyline. He really struggled against Gonzaga. In fact, to an extent, Dom kind of struggled against teams that were good. He did a lot of his damage against those bottom feeders in the WCC. He played 6 games against teams that are in the NCAA tournament. He shot 33% from 3 in those games. In every other game that he played this year, he shot 48%. So worth acknowledging, struggled a little bit against some of those better teams, but hoping Dom can find a place that makes him happy. I thought that LMU would work for him. And now he's leaving shortly after LMU made a pretty big move. For those of you who missed this, Stan Johnson, the head coach of the Lions, he hired Lorenzo Romar. So Lorenzo Romar, the longtime head coach at Pepperdine, of course, the head coach at Washington before that, stays in the WCC, doesn't even have to move. He stays in the area, goes to be the head coach or the associate head coach, at LMU. I think this is a great move. It's a great move for LMU. Lorenzo Romar is an extraordinary recruiter. He is a player's coach. The players love to play for him. He does a great job of recruiting. He's a good fundraiser. He's a well-liked human person, but he struggles with the X's and O's. He struggles to win basketball games. Let Stan Johnson figure that out. Romar can go out there, recruit, do the things that he's really good at. I think this is a huge hire for LMU. I think this could elevate them to another level, especially if they can find a way to land any of the trio of players who have left Pepperdine: Houston Millett, Javon Porter, Michael Ajayi. All 3 of those guys were all WCC caliber players. If any of them end up at LMU, that is a huge heist for the Lions, and they become a team to kind of keep an eye on as we go into next season of the WCC. Well, the Lady Zags earned a 4 seed. It is official. They will host a first-round regional series in Spokane at the McCarthy Athletic Center. They will first take on the number 13 seed UC-Irvine Anteaters in Spokane on Saturday. We're going to talk more about that draw for this team after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Say goodbye to busting brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game in the NCAA tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a number 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's number 1 sports book. Because right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 you can use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who you think's going to win it all. You can also toss that money down Gonzaga 1,000 to 1 odds to come out of the Midwest region. They got a big series ahead of them. They got to beat Kansas and Purdue most likely to do that, but that's 1,000-1 odds. I'm taking that bet. If you want to join me, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you can bet on college hoops until they cut down those nets. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, folks, closing out the show today, talking about Lisa Fortier and the Gonzaga women's basketball program. They earned a 4 seed in the 2024 NCAA Tournament, and they will host a regional in Spokane at the McCarthy Athletic Center. This is the highest seed in Gonzaga women's basketball history. They had twice been a 5 seed before this, but they had never actually earned that 4 seed. A huge accomplishment for Coach Fortier, for this team, for this program. Absolutely deserved it. 30-3 on the season. Absolute dominance in the WCC. We talked about it so many times on this podcast. They beat everybody by double digits. They won half their games by 20+ points in the conference. They had a very strong non-conference schedule as well. Only 2 losses, 1 to Wazoo, 1 to Louisville. Really, really good stuff. Had that big win over Stanford. And now they get a chance to take on UC-Irvine. And we're going to talk more about UC-Irvine later this week, probably on Thursday or Friday's episode. The game is not till Saturday. The game will be at 4:30 p.m. Pacific time on Saturday, for those of you wanting to mark your calendar here. Irvine went 23-8 on the year. They were 16-4 in the Big West. They played some similar teams. They played Eastern Washington, both in the non-conference. UC Irvine lost that game to Eastern Washington. Gonzaga did not. They also played Pepperdine and St. Mary's and lost both of those games on the road. Gonzaga, of course, did not lose to either of those teams. Irvine did beat Pacific in the non-conference. Gonzaga beat Pacific by 65 points at one point this year. So a little bit of a comparison there. For the net perspective, UC Irvine is 123rd. I believe that would have placed them 4th in the WCC behind Gonzaga, Santa Clara, and Portland. So they would have been a 4th place team in the WCC. Again, we'll get more into this team later this week, but we thought that they lost this opportunity. When they lost to Portland in the WCC championship, I thought they were going to get a 5 seed. I thought they were going to get a 5 seed in Corvallis, and I thought they were going to miss out on the opportunity to play in Spokane. That was not the case. Fortunately, the committee recognized their overall resume was just unbelievable. One of 5 teams in the country with 30+ wins, top 15 team in the net, and now they get a chance to host and advancing past UC. If they advance past UC Irvine, they will play the winner of 5-seeded Utah, the Utes, or 12-seeded South Dakota State, the Jackrabbits, who have 2 teams. Their men's team are the 15 seed. Shout out South Dakota State for putting both their teams in the NCAA tournament. That's always fun to see. The Zags played South Dakota State earlier this year, beat them 83-58. Now, probably not the team they're going to face in the second round if they advance past Irvine. Utah probably going to be the team they end up playing. They're the Utes, very successful program. And there's some history there. Brenna Maxwell, averaging 14.5 points, shooting 45% from 3 for the Zags, was prolific as an outside shooter for them last year. She spent the first 3 years of her college basketball career playing for Utah. So there's definitely going to be some feelings there in a 4-5 matchup in the second round in Spokane, playing against her former school. Naya Jukwu transferred to Gonzaga from Utah last year as well. She didn't play much for the Zags this year, but also some more blood on this team, having played at Utah previously. So rest of the region, Texas is your 1 seed. Stanford is your 2 seed. Obviously, there's a history there as Gonzaga beat Stanford, one of the very few losses that club took this year. NC State is your 3 seed. Tennessee is your 6 seed. A lot of rich history with the Vols, the women's basketball program out there. Of course, Gonzaga beat Stanford, so that's their other big connection. But this is a great draw for Gonzaga. Of course, getting to host is always the dream, and Coach Fortier talked about it, just how happy she was, and said she's coached for Gonzaga when they played a NCAA tournament game in Spokane as an assistant coach under Coach Kelly Graves, but this will be her first time head coaching a game for Gonzaga in the tournament while in Spokane. Really good accomplishment for her. 1,000% deserved. I want to shout out Portland, too. They earned a 13 seed after stealing that bid by winning the WCC tournament. They're playing a 4-seeded Kansas State team. If they win, they could end up playing the 5 seed there, which is Colorado. Bit of a Gonzaga connection there. Taylor Carr, former point guard at Gonzaga for 3 or 4 years, 2 or 3 years. I think she was a transfer. She is the assistant coach at Colorado, so potentially could see a WCC team play in Colorado and a former Zag point guard there. Again, we'll have more on the women's team as we get closer to that actual game taking place on Saturday afternoon. But that is going to wrap it up for us today. Otherwise, here on the Locked On Zags podcast, thank you so much to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. A reminder to join us on our Discord channel. And if you join us on Discord, there is a link in there for you to be able to join our bracket challenge. You can go in there, fill out your bracket. If you win, there are surprises. So come check it out. The link is in the show notes. It is free on audio and video platforms in those show notes. So come check us out. Hang out with us during the rest of the NCAA tournament. That's going to do it for us today. Thanks again. And as always, go Zags.